In this lesson, we are going to enable the Developer tab in Excel and discuss its various features from the perspective of VBA development. As an example, the Developer tab gives us access to interactive controls such as buttons, list boxes, etc. that allows us to create an interactive user experience. It is possible that you may not see the Developer tab in your Excel ribbon. That is because it is hidden by default. We will need to enable it. Let's look at two ways to achieve this. Go to File, come down to Options, click on Customize Ribbon. Let's cancel out. Alternatively, we can reach the same dialog box by right-clicking anywhere on any tab. Select Customize the ribbon. We are back at our Excel Options dialog box. Make sure Customize Ribbon option is selected. In the Main tabs pane, come down and click on Developer. Click OK, and the Developer tab has now appeared in the Excel ribbon. The Developer tab has a lot of useful features for VBA development. We'll focus on three groups on this tab: the Code group, the Add-ins group, and the Controls group. Let's look at the Code group first. We'll go through each button. First up is the Visual Basic button. This button takes us to the Visual Basic editor. Let's close it, but I will always recommend using the shortcut Alt F11. Next, we have the Macros button. This button gives us access to any macros that are available to run. Cancel. This feature is also available in the View tab under the Macros button. Come back to the Developer tab. Next, we have the Record Macro button. This button gives us access to the dialog box for recording macros. This feature is also accessible through the View tab and Macros button. Then we have the button for turning on relative references. This is a feature used while recording macros. Turning it on means that every cell reference is calculated in relation to the active cell as opposed to fixed references. This feature is also accessible through the View tab and Macros button. If you want to deep dive into these three features, you can check out the lesson on recording macros. Next, we have the Macro Security button. This button gives us access to the Trust Center dialog box. Here, we can view or change settings such as adding a trusted location on our computer, from where we can open macros without getting an Enable Content warning. We will deep dive into these settings in a later lesson on macro security. Next, let's briefly look at the Add-ins group. Add-ins allows us to add extra features to Excel. We can create an add-in in many ways, one of which is by using VBA. For example, suppose we have built a custom function in VBA that calculates the gross value, and we want our work colleagues to be able to use it as well. We could save this macro file as an add-in, store it in a common location, and the user can load that file by clicking on the Excel Add-ins button. So let's click on the Excel Add-ins button, click on Browse, come to the location where the Excel add-in has been saved, select it, click OK to load the add-in, click OK again. So I'll just type in some values out here. This is the net value, this is the GST value, and we can use our gross value function, which is the function in our add-in. Feed in the net value, comma, feed in the GST value, and click enter, and we get the gross value. The function itself is not fancy. The point out here being that we're making this function available through an add-in. We'll learn how to build more complex add-ins in a later chapter. Next, let's look at the Controls group. First, we have the Insert button, which gives us access to two types of controls that we can insert onto our worksheet. These are Form Controls and ActiveX Controls. Both types of controls are similar. For example, we have a Form button and we have an ActiveX command button. The basic difference between the two is that ActiveX has more advanced features. If we need to customize our controls as part of our requirement, we would use ActiveX Controls. We can also run macros on the click of a button, and we can use the Form controls to do this. Next, we have the Design mode. This button allows you to switch between Design and Run mode when editing controls. Let's insert an ActiveX control box. I can only edit its properties as long as we are in the Design mode. If we want to use this button, however, we need to deselect the Design mode. So now if we come out here and right click, I can't access the formatting options. Next, we have the Properties button. This button gives us access to the Properties window from the VBA editor. It shows us the properties of any select object. Currently, it's showing us the properties of the command button which has been selected. Ideally, we would use it to access the various customizable features of any ActiveX control. Then we have the View Code button. This button takes us to the backend code of a macro or ActiveX control. And we have the Run Dialog button. This button is not in use. We will deep dive into form controls and ActiveX controls in a later chapter. As a VBA programmer, you would probably use the Developer tab the most for adding various controls, especially buttons, to run macros. And that was a quick overview of the Developer tab. In the next lesson, we will look at 3 convenient ways where the user can trigger macros from within the Excel application.